If y'all will go ahead and take in your papers and find the slide that looks like that. That's where we're going to pick up tonight. Just by way of reminder, if you missed the class, we are live streaming these, which means they're being recorded. Live stream is a live event, but then the video is saved. As long as I do what I'm supposed to do, it's saved at any rate. And then it's eventually, like usually tonight, put up on YouTube. Okay, so YouTube, Vimeo is where you can find these if you miss a class. So make sure if you miss that you get to go back and watch that class. It'll help you to stay caught up in the material. So we were talking about the book of Revelation. We were talking about introductory material of the book. Talked about who it was directed to. Who is the book of Revelation directed to? Christians. Can we narrow that field a little bit? To the 7 churches in Asia. But we're not talking about China, Japan, and Korea. What are we talking about? It's Western Turkey. Okay, Western Turkey is where specifically these churches are located that we're talking about here in the class. But the book of Revelation is intended for a wider audience. Who's the wider audience? Christians as a whole. Okay, so those are the target audience, if you will. When we get to the 7 letters, you're going to see all sorts of information about those churches. That's going to take us probably about 3 or 4 classes to go through. All right, so we're talking tonight about the author. The author of the book of Revelation is identified as John. He's identified as John in several places. You have the references there. Revelation chapter 1 and verse 1, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to him to show to his servants the things that must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John. Same information is given to us in 4 of the same chapter, also verse 9 of the same chapter, also verse 8 of chapter 22. But the question then becomes, which John? Okay, and that might sound to be something that is kind of, well, what other John? It would be John the Apostle, right? Well, there's some possibilities out there. One of those possibilities is that it's an unknown prophet named John. And by the way, this is not something Stephen Baxley came up with. This is something that people have talked about over the centuries as to who the author is. So it might have been an unnamed prophet with the name of John. Could have been an elder living at Ephesus, okay, whose name is John, who was in exile to Patmos. Or it could be the Apostle John, who would have been both an apostle and a prophet. Anybody take a guess at where I come in on that? I come in on the apostle, okay? We're going to look at some evidence for that here in just a second. As a matter of fact, we're going to start looking at it now. We get some external evidence concerning the apostle. So, for example, we have the writings of Justin Martyr. Justin Martyr lived from 110 to 165 AD, so that is just after the close of the 1st century. And as we're going to see in a little while, it is also right after the book of Revelation was written. Justin Martyr wrote this. He said, "And further, there was a certain man with us whose name was John, one of the apostles of Christ, who prophesied by a revelation that was made to him, that those who believed in our Christ would dwell 1,000 years in Jerusalem, and that thereafter the general, and in short the eternal, resurrection and judgment of all men would likewise take place." Beyond the fact that Justin Martyr has got some misunderstandings concerning what John wrote, that we'll talk about later in the class, that whole 1,000 years in Jerusalem, what he does do is he does tell us that it was the Apostle John that wrote this book. Some more external evidence. We have another fellow, early Christian, whose name was Irenaeus. He lived later, well, a little bit later, but roughly the same time frame as Justin Martyr. He said John also, the Lord's disciple, when beholding the sacerdotal and glorious advent of his kingdom, says in the Apocalypse. And that word apocalypse there is the book that we otherwise call what? Revelation. Okay? So he's identifying the writer of the book as John, the Lord's disciple. That would be John the Apostle. We also have Clement of Alexandria, living from 153 to 217 AD. He said about the Apostle John, "For when on the tyrant's death he returned to Ephesus from the Isle of Patmos, he went away, being invited to the contiguous territories of the nations, here to appoint bishops, there to set in order whole churches, there to ordain such as were marked out by the Spirit." His reference here is to Domitian, not Nero. We'll talk about that later in the class, later in this class. he ascribes the book to the Apostle John. We have some other quotations as well. Tertullian is living in roughly the same time frame. He said, now the Apostle John in the Apocalypse, that's the book that, again, that we know of as Revelation, describes a sword which proceeded from the mouth of God as a doubly sharp, two-edged one. That is clearly a reference to the book of Revelation, beyond the fact that he names it the Apocalypse, and he says it's the Apostle John who wrote that book. So there is good external evidence for the Apostle John being the author of the book, regardless of what some people, especially nowadays, try to say about the authorship of the book of Revelation. We also have some internal evidence in the book. The Greek style of the book of Revelation differs from John's gospel, but so does the subject matter. Okay? So as you're looking at the Gospel of John, if you were looking at it in Greek, if you spoke Greek, you would see that there is definitely a difference in style between the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation. But understanding that the subject matter is so different also explains that as well. When you're writing a gospel, it's a different genre of literature than an apocalypse, okay, or apocalyptic literature, the book of Revelation. There is also, however, internally, the usage of at least 4 words that seem to indicate a common author. One of those is the word logos. Logos is the Greek word that's translated as word. Jesus is called the Word only in the Gospel of John, the first letter of John, and Revelation. No one else calls him that. Paul never calls Jesus the Logos in any of his writings. Hebrews doesn't call him the Logos. Peter doesn't call him the Logos. Luke doesn't call him the Logos. No one does except John, the Gospel of John, 1 John, and Revelation. That all indicates that those 3 books are coming from a common author. Then we also have the word Nikao, which is a very important word in the book of Revelation. It means to overcome. It is used only 3 times in writings that are not from John, but it appears 25 times in writings that are from John. That word is significant. Anybody wearing Nike shoes today? Come on, young people. Anybody wearing Nike shoes? Maybe even older people wearing Nikes? Or are Nikes out of fashion? No one wears Nikes anymore? Owen's got Nike shoes on. Aiden's got Nike shoes on. Tim's got Nike shoes on. Nike was the Greek goddess of, anybody know? Victory. Nikao is the verb form. It means to be victorious or to overcome. And in John's writing, it appears 25 times. In the rest of the entire New Testament, only 3. That's a good indication that there's common authorship in these books. A couple of other words. We have this word alathinos. It means true. It's used 5 times in non-John writings, if I can say it that way, as opposed to 22 in John's writings. Every one of us in this room this evening can think of a particular word that we probably like to use, right? Something that we use that's kind of us. It's a word that we like. It kind of marks us. So that if we see or hear something using that word, we might associate it with the individual. Same is true in Greek and in other languages as well, all other languages as far as I know. So alathinos is one of those words that John uses particularly. This word for true. There are other Greek words for true. He uses this one, okay? Then there is the Greek word arnion. Arnion means lamb. It is a particular word that is used 30 times in the New Testament only in writings of John. Okay? No one else uses that word. Do they use other words for lamb and sheep? Yes, they don't use that one. Okay? That word only appears in these writings that come from John. So the internal evidence indicates as well that Gospel of John, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, and Revelation are all coming from the same author. Let's move on. Are there any questions about that? Questions or comments? I'm moving quickly, not giving a whole lot of gaps, but you just need to let me know that you got something. Okay? And we'll stop and talk about what you got. Okay, so let's keep going. The place of writing is Patmos. That's told to us in Revelation chapter 1 and verse 9. So if you want to look over there, Revelation chapter 1 and verse 9. I, John, your brother and partner in the tribulation and the kingdom and the patient endurance that are in Jesus, was on the island called Patmos on account of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. If you look at verse 11, then John is told, write what you see in a book and send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus and to Smyrna and to Pergamum and to Thyatira and to Sardis and to Philadelphia and to Laodicea. So the place of writing of the book of Revelation is almost certainly the island of Patmos. Now, I need to explain that statement. There is no question that John received the vision on Patmos. There is no question that he is told to write it down. However, it is at least a little bit possible that he returns from exile, goes somewhere else, there records the message. Okay? Certainly not in Ephesus, because it is directed to the church in Ephesus as well as the others. If I were looking for the preponderance of the evidence, though, I would say that John receives the revelation on Patmos and he records it on Patmos. All right? Patmos is a small island. It's still there today, 13 square miles. So very, very small island. It's off the coast of Asia Minor. It is a volcanic island with very few trees, at least in the first century. All right? Today, there are about 3,000 people living there. Unclear how many during the first century. Anybody want to take a guess at one of the things that takes people to the island of Patmos today? Why would people today go to the island of Patmos? It's a volcanic island. There's no volcano on it, though. Any other guesses? To see the ruins, okay, because of its association with John, all right? It's a stop on cruises in that part of the Mediterranean. Cruise ship stop there as well. But as far as inhabitants is concerned, it's very, very small. If the place of writing is indeed Patmos, that's certainly where the revelation is received. It's the only book of the New Testament where the place of composition is given explicitly. Okay? Ignoring that little tiny chance that he actually goes back to the mainland and records it there. I think, again, most reasonable is that he's recording it there on Patmos after he receives it. If that's the case, it's the only one. Okay? Where it states specifically, explicitly where it was composed. All right. So, there's a map for y'all. We saw this map earlier. Those are our 7 churches: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. Patmos is this little tiny rock out here off the seacoast. Okay? John is exiled there. Why? He tells us. Because of the word. Okay? Because of the fact that he's a Christian. Christians in this area are being persecuted while this is being written, while he receives the vision. Okay? He's among them. In his case, it's not that he's executed. It is that he is sent into exile. All right. I did turn on the AC. I would say our air conditioning's not working, guys, because it's 75 in here right now.
It's on air or heat?
It's on cool, which tells me it's not working, which means the breaker's probably switched. So, short of having somebody that goes up in the attic to take care of that, we're just going to have to... All right, so this is, I've got a couple of photos from the island of Patmos. You can kind of see it's not treeless today. There are trees on it, or at least bushes at any rate. You got the big settlement down there. You got, like I said, 3,000 people living there today. Otherwise, it's pretty barren. Okay, this is the Acropolis, or what's left of it. This mountain here in the middle, that's where the Acropolis on Patmos would have been. There are just ruins there today. And then you have this rock in the harbor. It's called Kalikatso, and on that rock there was a temple of Aphrodite. Aphrodite being the goddess, the Greek goddess of love and hunting, and probably love and hunting, those two things. But there was a temple there in the ancient world on that rock, which is out there in the harbor. Okay, so another photograph from Patmos is just Cape Yonopa. Again, you get an idea, not a very pleasant looking place. I imagine that's probably why it was chosen as a place of exile. Okay? You generally don't send people to tropical paradises when you want to exile them, right? You send them these little barren rocks that no one wants to go to. So that's where John is when he receives this vision. All right, let's talk a little bit about dating Revelation. How can we date the book? There are two main dates that are presented. One of those is the reign of Nero, who reigns from 64 to 68 AD. Okay? The other date that's presented is the reign of Domitian. He reigns from 91 to 96 AD. Pretty much everybody that I know is going to fall into one of those two ranges, either the reign of Nero or the reign of Domitian. The early date would be about 68 AD during the reign of Nero. At this time, the temple is still standing. What temple?
Jerusalem.
The temple in Jerusalem would still be standing. When is the temple in Jerusalem destroyed? Anybody know?
70.
In 70, okay? So if Revelation is composed in 68, the temple would still be standing. The persecution in this case would be by Nero and or the Jews, okay? The Jews were still persecuting the church off and on, and so the persecution would have come from two different directions. The message would be what? Maintain loyalty. Stay loyal. Don't fall away from Jesus. The late date, what's called the late date, would be 96 AD. It's the reign of Domitian. At this point in time, the temple is long gone. Okay? The temple in Jerusalem destroyed in 70. We're talking 25, 26 years in the past. The persecution in this case would be the persecution of Christians by Rome. What would be the message? Maintain loyalty. What I want to point out is whether you believe it is the early date or the late date, the overall message is the same. How you're going to understand some details in the book are going to differ. And I know Christians and preachers who adopt the early date. I think they're wrong, but I still love them and like them. And in the end, we don't reach any wild conclusions from that. Okay, we don't go off into premillennialism because we believe in the early date. Okay, I just think the evidence is more in favor of 96 AD. But in the end, regardless of where you fall, the message is the same. So how you interpret some passages may differ, but the overall message is going to be the same. No change between the two. All right. So let's look at some extra. See, I'm here to convince you that it's the late date. Okay, I will never try to convince you of something I don't believe. If I believe it, I'll probably try to convince you of it. So let's look at some external evidence. Irenaeus, we've seen his name before. He was a pupil or a student of Polycarp. Polycarp knew John personally. He wrote in about 180 AD that Revelation had been composed during the reign of Domitian. Okay. This is also the earliest Christian writing. The earliest Christian writing, not this writing, but the earliest Christian writing which indicates that Revelation was written during the reign of Nero is from a heading found in a Syrian version dating to 508 AD. Okay. So the earliest Christian writing which puts Revelation in the reign of Nero is 400 years after the fact. And it's in a heading in a Syrian translation of the book of Revelation. Okay. Whereas you got early evidence indicating that it was written during the time of Domitian. Irenaeus said this: "We will not, however, incur the risk of pronouncing positively as to the name of Antichrist, for if it were necessary that his name should be distinctly revealed in this present time, it would have been announced by him who beheld the apocalyptic vision." That would be the book of Revelation. "For that was seen no very long time since, but almost in our day, toward the end of Domitian's reign." Hence my dating of 96, because that's the end of Domitian's reign. All right, internal evidence. The book itself describes a worldwide persecution. This is in Revelation chapter 3 and verse 10 that we'll look at later in the class. Chapter 13 and verse 8 also we'll look later in the class. That worldwide persecution was brought about by pagan religion joined with pagan political power. So you've got the pagan temples, the pagan priests, that get together with the pagan government, that's the Roman government, to persecute the church. That's what's described in the book of Revelation. Domitian's persecution was throughout the Roman Empire. Specifically, the book of Revelation has got in view what's going on in Asia Minor, but this persecution was everywhere. Nero's persecution, anybody know? Where did Nero persecute Christians? Rome. only in Rome. Well, it's a long way from here, but the point is it was only in Rome. Okay? It really doesn't matter whether it's far away from Asia Minor or not. The point is, Revelation says that persecution is worldwide. Nero's persecution is only in the city. If you were a Christian living in Asia Minor when Nero is emperor, it didn't really affect you at all. Domitian's persecution affects Christians living everywhere in the Roman Empire, okay? And when we talk about worldwide, we're talking about the Roman world, okay? All right. So, any questions so far? We're going to shift gears a little bit. Let me know when it starts to get really hot.
You like a ceiling fan.
Unfortunately, Cynthia, you're sitting right underneath that thing. And that just generates heat. All right, so let's talk about Revelation in the general context of Scripture.
I'm just looking around.
The differentness of the book causes some to lose sight of how it fits into Scripture. Okay? It is different. You go through the Gospels. You go through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You go through Acts. You go through the epistles. And then you get to the book of Revelation. It's like night and day. Okay? It's very, very different. And so it's very easy to lose sight of how it fits in to the rest of the New Testament, to the rest of Scripture. It is closely linked to thoughts that are introduced in Genesis, and quite a few allusions are to this book. So it's interesting to me that the very first book of the Bible, Genesis, and the very last book of the Bible, Revelation, actually have a lot of things that are in common. Okay? And as John as this is being revealed to John by the Holy Spirit, and he's writing these things, there's a lot of allusions back to the book of Genesis. So when you read the book of Revelation, sometimes it's almost as if you're reading something from Genesis. Okay? We'll see that as we go through the study. There is a very close relationship thematically to the book of Daniel. And in fact, Revelation is the capstone of one very famous prophecy found in Daniel chapter 2, 31 through 45. So let's go to Daniel chapter 2. We remember this, don't we? Daniel chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar sees a big statue divided up into 4 parts. Doesn't know what the meaning is. That's okay. God gives the meaning to Daniel. Daniel's going to give it to Nebuchadnezzar. Let's drop down. So I don't want us to read the whole thing. Let's drop down to 44. Okay? He goes down the list. You get the Babylonian Empire. What follows the Babylonian Empire? Anybody know? Persian. Babylonian, then Persian, then what? Greek, then Rome. Okay? And it's in the days of Rome that God sets up his kingdom. So look at verse 44. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, a great God is made known to the king. What shall be after this? The dream is certain, and its interpretation sure. Sometimes what we do with Daniel chapter 2 is we say it is all fulfilled on the day of Pentecost. That's not technically true. Because part of Daniel's prophecy, part of this dream, is that when God sets up his kingdom, it will spread throughout the world and it will not be destroyed. That's what Revelation is about. The church is established on the day of Pentecost. That's way back in Acts chapter 2. We read about the church spreading in the book of Acts. Revelation tells us that this is certain, because Rome will do everything it can to destroy the church. Where's the Roman Empire today?
Gone.
It's gone. If you say, well, we can still go to Italy and see Rome, yes, you can. But that's not the Roman Empire. It's a far cry from the Roman Empire. Okay? And only a die-hard patriotic Italian would deny that fact. Okay? The Roman Empire ruled the world with an iron rod. Italy doesn't do that today. The Roman Empire is gone. Where's the church?
It's everywhere.
everywhere. It's in Italy. It's in Central Europe. It's in North America. It's in Canada. It's in South America. It's in Africa. All over the world. And we see that fulfilled in the book of Revelation, because the message of Revelation is Rome's going to fail. Rome's going to fall. The church is going to last forever. The church belongs to Christ. Whose side do you want to be on? If you're thinking it'd be better to be with the world, or this Rome, or this empire, or that empire, you're going to be on the losing team. Period. That's the message of Revelation. Okay? That's how it fits. It begins things that starts in Genesis, and we get them all through the scriptures. It really is the capstone of that prophecy. It's really about the kingdom of Jesus. Its establishment and its victory. There's my word. There's John's word. Victory. What's the word in Greek? Nikao. Y'all are all going to know that by the time this class is over. I'm going to drill that into you, and I'm going to be able to go into the auditorium in a sermon and say, what's the Greek word for victory? And all of you who've been in Revelation will say, in one loud, united voice, Nikao. Okay? Well, it's to be victorious. Okay? In all fairness, it's not the noun. All right. So, Bauckham says this in his book, The Theology of the Book of Revelation. The method and conceptuality of the theology of Revelation are relatively different from the rest of the New Testament. But once they are appreciated in their own right, Revelation can be seen to be not only one of the finest literary works of the New Testament, but also one of the greatest theological achievements of early Christianity. There is a reason why I love the book of Revelation. Because in the book of Revelation, we see the church victorious. But you know what else we see in the book of Revelation?
Satan loses.
Satan loses. We see something really important about Jesus. Jesus' deity is strongly proclaimed in the book of Revelation. And the structure of Revelation is exquisite. Okay? I know we got Cynthia over here, English teacher, literature, and all of that. She's trained to appreciate structure in books and things like that. Trained to teach people how to do that. Years past, I've had Carol in my class. Same kind of thing. The structure of the book of Revelation is absolutely beautiful. Far too often, we as Christians, because we're afraid of the book, lose sight of that and miss it. It is a pearl in the New Testament, okay, as far as how it's structured, how it is laid out. I will tell you this, lots of sevens. Remember sevens in the book of Revelation. Not only are they important symbolically, they also form the structure of the book. Far beyond just the seven churches. Okay? So that's what Bauckham says. I think it's a pretty good quote about the book. All right. So, talk a little bit, looking at my watch. I do want to get through the introduction tonight. Symbolism in the book of Revelation. Numbers are highly symbolic. Remember I said if you're an engineer or an accountant, this is going to drive you nuts. Okay? So be prepared to be driven nuts, or just kind of put that in a box, that accountant, engineering thing, architecture thing over there for Ed. All right? Put that in a box, because Numbers and Revelation are really symbolic. They're not meant to be taken literally. Okay? 1 is a number that suggested unity, or that which is unique. Okay? The only one. Hear, O Israel, our God is one. Okay? Unity, or that which is unique. The number 2 is twice 1. Obviously, 2 times 1. It's symbolic of strength, redoubled courage, and energy. You'll see that in the book of Revelation. Not so much as some of the other numbers, but it is there also. 3, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Symbolic of the divine. Symbolic of that which pertains to God. Okay? Next slide. 4, the 4 boundaries of the earth. Symbolic of the world in which men live. How many corners does the earth have?
None.
It's a trick question. Who said none? You're right. The earth is round. It has no corners. And yet, for millennia, people have talked about the 4 corners of the earth. And we still have 4 cardinal directions, don't we? North, south, east, and west. Okay? So yes, we understand the earth is round. Okay? No question about that. But people talk about four corners. They talk about four directions. The four boundaries of the earth. So 4 usually is symbolic of the world in which men live. This world. Okay? Things that pertain to it. 7 is another number. It comes from 3 plus 4. That's the divine plus the earthly. It's symbolic of completeness and perfection. So, how many days does God create?
You created 7 days.
I love this. I love it. All this discussion. He creates in 6, but he rests in the 7th. That forms the week. Okay? So yes, technically, God creates in 6 days, but God doesn't stop because they have the day of rest, number 7. Okay? So a week made out of 7 days. In the book of Revelation, 7 churches, symbolic of all the church. In the book of Revelation, the 7 spirits of God. How many spirits of God are there? There's 1. And yet in the book of Revelation, we see 7. Okay? How many trumpets in the book of Revelation? This is easy. Just say 7. You got it. Okay? 7 trumpets in the book of Revelation. How many bowls? 7. Okay? So you see 7. By the way, that's a lot of the structure right there. Okay? Bowls and trumpets and such things. 7 is symbolic of completeness or perfection. The number 10 is also symbolic of completeness. So you can have 2 numbers that symbolize some of the same things. So, everybody in here got 10 fingers? Everybody got 10 toes? Anybody in here got 11? You don't have to tell me if you do. It does happen. People are born with an 11th digit, okay? Either an extra finger or an extra toe. And we all know from The Princess Bride that Inigo Montoya is looking for a 6-fingered man. Yes? All right. If y'all don't know that movie, you got to watch The Princess Bride, okay? 6-fingered man. Every child that's born, when they're born, they go through a series of tests in the hospital. They get an APGAR score. Anybody ever heard of that? Parents have. What's one of the things they count? Fingers and toes. Because if you're missing something or you got extra, that's noted. Okay? 10 is complete. If you got all 10 fingers, all 10 toes, you got what you're supposed to have. Okay? If you got extra ones, well, that'll come in handy if you ever accidentally cut one off. Right? My grandfather, my dad's dad, he had cut off half of his finger. He always made fun of us about that. Made fun of it with us as kids. 10 is symbolic of completeness. From that, then, we get another number, 1,000. 1,000 is 10 times 10 times 10. Mathematically speaking. But 1,000 is symbolic of a whole and full period of time. So let me just stop for a second and let me just throw this out there. When the book of Revelation talks about Jesus reigning for 1,000 years, is that literal or symbolic? It is symbolic. Okay? It does not mean that Jesus is going to reign exactly 1,000 years, not one day more, not one day less. The number is being used in this way. Okay? Symbolic of perfection. A full period of time. All right. 6. 6 is 1 short of 7. Symbolic of failure and defeat. So, when we get somebody in the book of Revelation who's given the name or the number 666, people have gone bonkers with that over the centuries, trying to figure out who that is. They miss the point. The point of the one who is numbered 666 is it is failure upon failure upon failure. Because in the book of Revelation, who wins? God does. Who loses? Satan does. And so does everybody who puts themselves on his side. That's what that number's all. See, you can skip that part of the book of Revelation. We'll go over that in class again. All right? 1 short of 7, symbolic of failure or defeat. All right. The last little bit here. 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days. All of those are equivalent. I'll get you in just a second. All of those are equivalent. They are half of 7. symbolic of an indefinite period of time, but less than the full period. Okay? 7 is perfection. Half of 7, not the full period. Okay? You will see these numbers or their equivalents used in the book of Revelation. All right, Caleb.
Is there a reason why 6 was last and not put in order after 4? I just didn't know if there's like a symbolic reason for that too.
There is no symbolic reason for that, Caleb.
Okay.
That's just the order I put them in. I suspect that the material I was using to create the class had it in that order, and so I just mimicked that order.
Okay.
No, there's no particular reason for that. Although it is easier to understand 6 when you understood 7, right? Does that make sense?
A little. Yeah.
So there's the reason right there.
Okay.
Because in order to understand 6, you have to understand what 7 means. Because 6 is short of perfection. If I said 6 is short of perfection before I said what 7 symbolizes, we wouldn't understand that. Now, I didn't come up with that. I think I mimicked the material. And so whoever, I think it was probably Harkwriter that did that. And if so, that's probably why he put it in that order.
Okay.
But there's no symbolism to it.
I had asked you this before, but I don't remember what you said. It was during
Cynthia,
the
there's no guarantee I'll remember what I said.
The years, if I understand correctly, years and all that were based on this Gregorian calendar and all of this. Would 3.5 years this time be the same as 3.5 years and now 12 months and all of that?
Yes. Let's do the math.
I don't do that.
Oh, somebody here does math. 42 months. Okay? So 12, and 6 is what?
But has
42
there always
months.
been 12 months in a year, even prior
Yes.
to the Gregorian calendar?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the Jewish
calendar.
The Jewish calendar had a 12-month year, except when they had to adjust the calendar and they put an extra month in.
Okay.
But they would never have said it has 13 months. It has 12 months.
Okay, that
Okay.
makes
And then, of course, that's 3.5 years. 1,260 days. How do you get 3.5 out of that? Someone get out your calculator. Take 365 and multiply it times 3.5. Tell me what you get. Oh, nobody's going to get out. I can't. My phone's over here doing live stream. Come on. Somebody ought to be able to do that.
365 what?
Here we go.
1,277.
Oh, so how does that happen?
Leap day.
Leap years. Yeah.
Because the month was taken as 30 days. And then when you multiply it out, you get 1,260 days. Okay? The Jews used a lunar calendar. That's why they had to put an extra month in. Because over time, it gets out of sync. Okay? Muslims, by the way, use a lunar calendar as well. They do not have an extra month to put it in sync. So Ramadan, if you ever follow your calendars and just come look at these holidays, Easter, or say differently, Passover, Jewish Passover, is almost always, it always is, not almost always, it is always in the spring. Ramadan moves through the calendar. So Ramadan will be in the winter, and then some years down the road it will be in the summer. Because it does not, there is no adjustment for that. But the reality is we have a solar existence, don't we? A year is one turn around the sun, which is 365 days. John?
Our current Gregorian calendar was a replacement for the Julian, which was drifting in the beginning of the seasons because he didn't have leap years in there.
Right, and that was all well after the time of the book of Revelation.
Yes.
So yes, it still worked that way in the ancient world as well. Any other questions or comments? Good. Y'all keep doing this, okay? I like that. I don't like to lecture. Regardless of what some people might think, right, Sam? I don't like to lecture. I'd rather have lectures. All right. So, numbers need to be understood in their symbolic sense, not their mathematical sense. Okay? Very important to remember that in the book of Revelation. All right. General schools of interpretation. There is the futurist school. Millennial and dispensational groups generally fall in this category. They believe that the book of Revelation contains as yet unfulfilled prophecies of future events. When I talk about millennial and dispensational groups, I'm talking about almost everybody you will encounter in the Baptist church, non-denominational churches, etc., etc., etc. Okay? Those are going to be the groups that are millennial and dispensational. All right? Then there is the continuous historical school of interpretation. In this particular case, the book is viewed as a forecast of the history of the church, the Roman Catholic era, followed by the Reformation, etc., etc., etc. Another school of interpretation is the philosophy of history. I will just say this, that previous one there, if I can get back to it, that continuous historical used to be really big. Anybody know when? Back in the Reformation. Okay? Not so much anymore. All right? It's pretty much non-existent or not very widespread at any rate. Philosophy of history, events are symbolic of forces at work, sets forth principles which God uses throughout history. Also not very widespread. The preterist view is that everything has been fulfilled. Everything in the book of Revelation has been fulfilled. It's a typical view of those who hold the AD 70 heresy among brethren. Okay? So there is a doctrine among some churches that believe that everything was fulfilled in 70 AD, including the resurrection. We're not going to go into detail in that in class because it's beyond the scope of this class, but this is generally the view that's held in that particular grouping of folks. Then there is the historical background. School of interpretation seeks to find the meaning the book held when it was revealed. Events are fulfilled in the first 200 years or perhaps longer after it was revealed. The background is a message for all time. Anybody want to take a wild guess which of those five is the one that Stephen Baxley falls into? That one right there. Okay.
You said John was a prophet. How was he a prophet?
Because all the apostles were. They revealed God's word.
A prophet foretold the future. Okay.
Prophet can foretell the future, but in their general meaning is that they reveal God's word.
Oh, okay.
So, that tells us that most of what we're going to find in the book of Revelation is already past history for us, except at the end, where we get the final consummation and judgment. We'll talk about that in class also. Okay, so some rules for study interpretation. This is straight out of Harkrider. All right, page 7 of his book. 1, remember that Revelation was written by John primarily for the encouragement and edification of the Christians of his own time. If we forget that, we will mess up the book of Revelation. Okay? We have to remember that. Remember that the book of Revelation is written largely in symbolic language, thus it cannot be taken literally. Jesus does not have a literal sword coming out of his mouth. Okay? One can ill afford to be dogmatic in interpreting the symbols which are not so easily understood. Some of them are not. Remember that Revelation uses Old Testament terminology with New Testament meaning. John has used much of the terminology of Ezekiel and Daniel, but has adapted them to suit his own message. An understanding of the Old Testament prophets and their use of symbols would be helpful. For over 400 allusions are to the Old Testament. How many chapters in the book of Revelation?
24?
22. Okay. 22 chapters in the book of Revelation. 400 allusions. You do the math. If we just round it, let's make it 20 chapters. That means there are 20 allusions in any given chapter in the book of Revelation. That's a lot. There is no other book of the New Testament that even comes close to the book of Revelation. All right. For the true meaning of Revelation, one must seek to grasp the visions or series of visions as a whole without pressing the details of the symbolism. You need to see the forest and not get lost in the trees. Understand difficult passages in the light of clearer passages. Make all interpretations consistent with the teaching of the whole Bible. If we understand the book of Revelation to mean that Jesus is going to come back and physically reign on the earth, when other passages that are not symbolic say that's not going to happen, chances are our mistake is where?
Was it Jehovah's Witness?
Chances are our mistake is in our understanding and interpretation of the symbolic language. Okay? All right, so structure of the book. Chapters 1 through 11. We have 5 minutes. Chapters 1 through 11. First half of the book. Christ among the lampstands, chapters 1 through 3. Christ, 7 letters to the churches. The throne scene, chapters 4 and 5. There it's divided. We're going to go right through this structure as we go through the book. Then we have the loosing of the, how many seals? 7 seals. So you get the white horse, red horse, black horse, pale horse. Those are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And you will notice them if you will look at your title page.
Scary.
ancient artwork about those guys. Then we have an interlude. Then we have silence in silence in heaven. Okay, should say. Sealing of the 144,000. We'll talk about that. Then we get the, how many trumpets? 7 trumpets. The 7th seal is the trumpets. So the 7 seals open, 7 trumpets. There they're listed. Another interlude. Okay. Then we start over. The book of Revelation is the same story told twice. One was the struggle on the earth, told from an earthly perspective. Chapters 12 through 22 is a deeper spiritual background. It's the same story, told from a spiritual perspective. Okay, what's going on behind the scenes? All right, bowls of wrath, 7 last plagues. Okay. Battle of Armageddon takes up a huge part of the book of Revelation. Huge. We're going to spend like 10 classes on the book of Armageddon. Oh no, we're not. It's barely a blip in the book of Revelation. Okay, doesn't get near the treatment that sometimes people think. All right. The fall of Babylon, the complete and final victory of the church, and then we have Christ the victorious warrior, defeat of the enemies, judgment, and the saints at home with God. I'll just throw this out there. These are parts of the book of Revelation that have not yet been fulfilled. But they are foreshadowed in what the rest of the book is all about. All right. Class plan. As if you didn't already know. I use Robert Harkrider's workbook as a structure. If you want a copy of that, buy one. One Stone, Gospel, Guardian of Truth will have it. Pick up one of those. Not terribly expensive. You'll pay more for shipping than you will for the book.
What's his last name?
Harkrider. It's in your notes.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Okay. The next section of Revelation to study will always be announced in slides at the end of each lesson. It will. Write down questions you may have so we can discuss them in class. Kudos to the questions that were asked tonight. I love questions and comments. I love them. I promise you, your questions and comments will not cause us to fall behind. Okay? So write your questions down. Read the reading in advance and write your questions down. Attendance, electronically or in person, is very important. It is easy, typo there, to fall behind in such a book and get a bit lost. If you miss 2 classes and you don't watch the videos and you don't read the material, you will come back on the 3rd class and you will be a little lost. Okay? You need to always stay caught up. Attend as much as you can. It's always better in person. But if you can't, watch the videos. And hopefully we're not going to have any glitches and lose any of those videos. All right, so next class, which is going to be Sunday, Revelation chapter 1, verses 1 through 8. Just 8 verses. Okay, that's it. Revelation 1, 1 through 8. Bring something to write with to class as well. Okay, because sometimes I'll have stuff for y'all to do. Not a test. Although I have done that. Not a test, but things to write. All right? Thank y'all. Any questions or comments? Pen, the paper you'll have is good enough. No, you don't need to have paper, but pens are great.